The bishop's opening is rare, which makes it so effective. It sets up deadly attacks and quick wins no matter how your opponent develops. Let's dive in and see how the plan works against common moves. They play knight to f6, attacking your pawn, so you defend it. Then they bring out their bishop, similar to the Italian game, and you continue with knight to c3. This setup is known as the Vienna hybrid because it combines ideas from both the Vienna gambit and the bishop's opening. At this point, you're waiting for your opponent's next move to decide how to launch your attack. You usually have two main plans. Either play bishop to g5 to pin the knight, or push the f-pawn forward, attacking in a style similar to the King's Gambit or the Vienna Gambit. If your opponent castles, because many players simply think, I'll just castle here, then bishop to g5 becomes even stronger. Once they are castled, it's much harder for them to chase away your bishop with moves like pawn to h6 and pawn to g5. From here, you can safely retreat your bishop to h4, keeping a strong pin, or even better, push pawn to h4, setting up the dangerous fishhook trap. This tempts your opponent to capture your bishop, but doing so is a serious mistake. And if they don't capture, you still keep the powerful pin on their knight and continue your attack. You can bring your queen out and reinforce the pressure, maybe bring the knight out. Therefore, it is still certainly very hard for black to cope with this whole pressure. Now, in most cases, they are simply going to capture the bishop, which is basically a losing mistake. You are going to recapture, attacking this knight, but more importantly, opening this file for your rook. And you can see why it is so effective after your opponent has castled, because now this rook actually starts creating deadly checkmating threats. Also, notice that we delayed development of this knight. Your knight is still right here, not on f3, because otherwise it would block out the queen, and we did not want that. Alright, so the knight now needs to go somewhere. Your queen controls these squares. Your pawns control these squares. Therefore, the knight will have to go somewhere back, and if it goes to one square or the other, it does not really matter. You just throw your queen forward to the h5 square. And that is it. You have this queen and bishop battery. You are threatening to capture on this side on the next turn, so your queen wants to enter one of these two squares and checkmate black. If they try to escape by playing rook to e8 and trying to defend that way, then you simply capture the pawn on f7. Notice our bishop from the bishop's opening. It really plays a key role here. It cuts off the king, which can no longer run away. The king has to move to the only available square, and now you sacrifice the rook on this square and finish the game in style. But what if your opponent does not castle? Well, then they are likely to play pawn to d6. In that case, you switch over to your second attacking plan, pushing your pawn to f4. This is essentially an improved version of the King's Gambit, where you gain all the benefits of a kingside attack with no downside, because in this case it is not even a gambit. Your pawn is protected. Also notice that we delayed the development of our knight, so that the knight does not block the pawn. If you had developed your knight earlier on that square, you would not have been able to push the pawn forward. But because you delayed it, you now have the opportunity to advance the pawn and only later bring out the knight, reinforcing the pressure against the central pawn. From here, you can then decide whether to continue attacking the pawn on e5 or push your pawn forward to f5, really locking the position and gaining a strong space advantage. In both cases, it is quite unpleasant for your opponent. You may wonder, what if black simply captures the pawn? That actually helps you. They give up the center, you develop your bishop, and black gains nothing. Often, black tries knight to g4, thinking you are playing incorrectly since you have not developed your kingside knight or castled. It looks dangerous, as they threaten bishop to f2 or knight to f2, forking your queen and rook. At first glance, there seems to be no defense of that square, but instead, you strike back confidently with pawn to f5. You are actually encouraging your opponent to execute their threat, because now you have locked the bishop on c8. It no longer defends the knight due to your advanced pawn, and therefore queen takes g4 is actually a real threat. However, your opponent feels confident. They were planning to play knight to f2 anyway, delivering the fork. They believe they are attacking, but little do they know. They are actually heading straight into a blunder. From here, your queen jumps forward to the h5 square, threatening a deadly checkmate. Suddenly, your opponent is in serious trouble. The key here is that your attack develops so quickly thanks to your space advantage and the many active pieces you already have in play. Usually, black will try to castle at this point. Then you respond with bishop to g5, bringing yet another piece into the attack with tempo, directly hitting the queen. Notice that the pawn cannot move forward because it is pinned to the king, once again thanks to your powerful bishop from the bishop's opening. Therefore, black must do something about this. In most cases, they will move the king to e8. At this moment, you continue with knight to d5. Once again, you completely ignore their supposed threats and instead create your own powerful counterplay. You simply overwhelm them with activity. No matter what your opponent does, for example, even if they capture your rook, it does not change the outcome. You already have your queen involved in the attack, 2 active bishops, the knight, and even the advanced pawn on f5 supporting the assault. With so many forces bearing down, the attack is simply unstoppable. Now comes a clever trick. Your opponent assumes you moved your knight to d5 to capture the pawn, but instead you sacrifice the knight, giving check to the king. If they refuse to capture, then queen takes h7 is coming. If they do capture, then after bishop takes f6, the king is left exposed and you quickly deliver checkmate after moves like bishop takes g1 or almost anything black tries. Clearly, your opponent ignored the lesson about centralization. You follow up with queen to g5 and finish the game. So far, we have seen one attacking plan that works against most of your opponent's moves. But if black plays knight to f6, attacking your pawn, you have a second, even sharper option. The Ponziani gambit, starting with pawn to d4. This challenges black immediately. Here, black has 2 choices. Capture with the knight on the pawn it was already attacking, or capture the other central pawn. The irony is that one of these moves is correct, while the other is a losing mistake. If they play knight takes c4, then after pawn takes c5, their knight is trapped and has no safe retreat. Even though black's position is already difficult, they often make another mistake with bishop to c5, still aiming at your pawn on f2. Now you have a choice. You could sacrifice your bishop on f7 and follow up with queen to d5, winning back the knight, picking up the pawn on f7 and exposing their king. A stronger approach is simply queen to d5. This threatens queen takes f7 checkmate, attacks the knight on a4, and indirectly targets the bishop on c5, a triple threat. Black may try bishop takes f2 with check, but it does not change anything. You safely move your king, and their position remains collapsing. Even the most popular continuations in online games fail to save them. Black will usually try to castle again. The most common continuation is queen takes c4, leaving you up a knight while you continue the attack. The bishop on f2 is also under threat. Black often retreats the bishop back to b6. You then develop your knight, and black plays pawn to c6, seemingly preparing pawn to d5. Now you play bishop to d3, creating a strong threat. Even though you are temporarily behind in material, you are the one controlling the attack. Black is forced to play pawn to g6 to prevent immediate checkmate. You respond with bishop to g5, bringing another piece into the attack and threatening the queen. Black moves the queen, most commonly to e8, and you continue with bishop to f6, cutting off the king and preparing to bring your queen into the decisive attack. If black tries pawn to d5 to attack your queen, it actually helps you because that square was already part of your plan. You maintain your threats, and when black attempts pawn to h5 to block, you finish beautifully. Sacrifice your queen on h5, then play knight to g5. Even though black is temporarily up a queen, it is their turn, and they have no way to stop the inevitable checkmate. Thanks for watching. If you think this video is helpful for you, then like and subscribe. See you in the next one.